Hello, hello everyone. How are we all doing today? Hey, it's Ray Langley at your service. Virtual entertainer and wolf girl extraordinaire. It is great to see you all again today. How's everyone been? It's been a little bit, right? I missed you guys as well. It felt a little weird not streaming on Monday, I'll tell you that much, but that's going to be part of my new schedule from now on. As you might have noticed, I did post my schedule yesterday. And my streaming days, I'm aiming for Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday from now on. Give myself a little bit um, more of a weekend availability for streaming. How is everyone? Have you all been doing good? How was your Halloween? I know that was like a few days ago by now, but All right. So, today I'm going to be reading more of the Edgar Allan Poe story collection. There are so many in here that I won't get to all the ones I want to read today, so we'll probably pocket the rest for another time. But we're going to read the ones that I was really looking forward to doing during my endurance stream last week. That I just wasn't able to do uh, due to the Skullgirls character stories taking up most of that time. So I'm just circling back and taking care of these stories before we move on to our next big novel or whatever that I'll be doing after this. And just to make sure, you guys can hear my background music pretty well, right? I have it a little low, but barely. Okay, let me go ahead and fix that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm looking at the sound levels now, and the ambient music should be a little bit louder. Fus Roda. Okay, so we are going to be reading. Let's see. Flipping through this book is difficult because of how thick it is. Let's see. I think I remember liking this one. This one's a relatively short one, so we're gonna start with this one. It's called Hop Frog by Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, it's all by Edgar Allan Poe, but you know. And just in case the large book cover on the screen wasn't an indication. Hop Frog. I never knew anyone so keenly alive to a joke as the king was. He seemed to live only for joking. To tell a good story of the joke kind, and to tell it well, was the surest road to his favor. Thus it happened that his 7 ministers were all noted for their accomplishments as jokers. They all took after the king, too, in being large, corpulent, oily men, as well as inimitable jokers. Whether people grow fat by joking, or whether there's something in fat itself which predisposes to a joke, I've never been quite able to determine, but certain it is that a lean joker is a rara avis in terris. about the refinements, or as he called them, the ghosts of wit. The king troubled himself very little. He had an especial admiration for breadth in a jest, and would often put up with length for the sake of it. Over niceties wearied him. He would have preferred Rabelais' Gargantua to the Zadig of Voltaire, and upon the whole, practical jokes suited his taste far better than verbal ones. At the date of my narrative, professing jesters had not altogether gone out of fashion at court. Several of the great continental powers still retained their fools who wore motley with caps and bells and who were expected to be always ready with sharp witticisms at a moment's notice, in consideration of the crumbs that fell from the royal table. Our king, as a matter of course, retained his fool. The fact is, he required something in the way of folly, if only to counterbalance the heavy wisdom of the 7 wise men who were his ministers, not to mention himself. His fool, or professional jester, was not only a fool, however. His value was trebled in the eyes of the king by the fact of his being also a dwarf and a cripple. Dwarves were as common at court in those days as fools, and many monarchs would have found it difficult to get through their days are rather longer at court than elsewhere, without both a jester to laugh with and a dwarf to laugh at. But as I have already observed, your jesters in 99 cases out of 100 are fat, round, and unwieldy, so that it was no small source of self-gratulation with our king that, in Hopfrog, this was the fool's name, he possessed a triplicate in one person. I believe the name Hopfrog was not given to the dwarf by his sponsors at baptism, but it was conferred upon him, by general consent of the 7 ministers, on account of his inability to walk as other men do. In fact, Hopfrog could only get along by a sort of interjectional gait, something between a leap and a wriggle, a movement that afforded illimitable amusement and, of course, consolation to the king, for, notwithstanding the protuberance of his stomach and a constitutional swelling of the head, the king by his whole court was accounted a capital figure. But although Hopfrog, through the distortion of his legs, could move only with great pain and difficulty along a road or floor, the prodigious muscular power which nature seems to have bestowed upon his arms by way of compensation for deficiency in his lower limbs, enabled him to perform many feats of wonderful dexterity, where trees or ropes were in question, or anything else to climb. At such exercises, he certainly much more resembled a squirrel or a small monkey than a frog. I am not able to say with precision from what country Hopfrog originally came. It was from some barbarous region, however, that no person ever heard of, a vast distance from the court of our king. Hopfrog and a young girl very little less dwarfish than himself, although of exquisite proportions and a marvelous dancer, had been forcibly carried off from their respective homes in adjoining provinces, and sent as presents to the king by one of his ever victorious generals. Under these circumstances, it is not to be wondered at that a close intimacy arose between the 2 little captives. Indeed, they soon became sworn friends. Hopfrog, who, although he made a great deal of sport, was by no means popular, had it not in his power to render Trippetta many services. But she, on account of her grace and exquisite beauty, although a dwarf, was universally admired and petted, so she possessed much influence and never failed to use it, whenever she could, for the benefit of Hop Frog. On some grand state occasion, I forget what, the king determined to have a masquerade. And whenever a masquerade or anything of that kind occurred at our court, then the talents both of Hop Frog and Trippetta were sure to be called into play. Hop Frog, in especial, was so inventive in the way of getting up pageants, suggesting novel characters and arranging costume for masked balls, that nothing could be done, it seems, without his assistance. The night appointed for the fete had arrived. A gorgeous ball had been fitted up under Trippetta's eye with every kind of device which could possibly give eclat to a masquerade. The whole court was in a fever of expectation. As for costumes and characters, it might well be supposed that everybody had come to a decision at such points. Many had made up their minds as to what roles they should assume a week or even a month in advance, and in fact there was not a particle of indecision anywhere, except in the case of the king and his 7 ministers. Why they hesitated, I never could tell, unless they did it by way of a joke. More probably, they found it difficult, on account of being so large, to make up their minds. At all events, time flew, and as a last resort, they sent for Trippetta and Hop Frog. When the 2 little friends obeyed the summons of the king, they found him sitting at his wine with the 7 members of his cabinet council, but the monarch appeared to be in very ill humor. He knew that Hop Frog was not fond of wine, for it excited the poor cripple almost to madness, and madness is no comfortable feeling. But the king loved his practical jokes, and took pleasure in forcing Hop Frog to drink and, as the king called it, be merry. "Come here, Hop Frog," said he, as the jester and his friend entered the room. "Swallow this bumper to the health of your absent friends." Here Hop Frog sighed. "And then let us have the benefit of your invention. We want characters. Characters, man! Something novel out of the way. We are wearied with this everlasting sameness. Come drink. The wine will brighten your wits." Hop Frog endeavored, as usual, to get up a jest in reply to these advances from the king, but the effort was too much. It happened to be the poor dwarf's birthday, and the command to drink to his absent friends forced the tears to his eyes. Many large, bitter drops fell into the goblet as he took it humbly from the hand of the tyrant. Roared the latter as the dwarf reluctantly drained the beaker. "See what a glass of good wine can do! Why, your eyes are shining already!" Poor fellow. His large eyes gleamed rather than shone, for the effect of wine on his excitable brain was not more powerful than instantaneous. He placed the goblet nervously on the table and looked upon round the company with a half-insane stare. They all seemed highly amused at the success of the king's joke. "And now to business," said the Prime Minister, a very fat man. "Yes," said the king. "Come, Hop Frog, lend us your assistance. Characters, my fine fellow, we stand in need of characters. All of us, ha ha ha!" And as this was seriously meant for a joke, his laugh was chorused by the 7. Hop Frog also laughed, although feebly and somewhat vacantly. "Come, come," said the king, fiercely, impatiently. "Have you nothing to suggest?" "I am endeavoring to think of something novel," replied the dwarf, abstractly, for he was quite bewildered by the wine. "Endeavoring?" cried the tyrant. "What do you mean by that? Ah, I perceive. You are sulky and want more wine. Here, drink this. And he poured out another goblet full and offered it to the cripple, who merely gazed at it, gasping for breath. Drink, I say, shouted the monster, or by the fiends! The dwarf hesitated. The king grew purple with rage. The courtiers smirked. Trippetta, pale as a corpse, advanced to the monarch's seat, and falling on her knees before him, implored him to spare her friend. The king regarded her for some moments in evident wonder at her audacity. He seemed quite at a loss what to do or say, how most becomingly to express his indignation. At last, without uttering a syllable, he pushed her violently from him and threw the contents of the brimming goblet in her face. The poor girl got up as best she could, and not daring even to sigh, resumed her position at the foot of the table. There was a dead silence for about a half a minute, during which the falling of a leaf or of a feather might have been heard. It was interrupted by a low but harsh and protracted grating sound, which seemed to come at once from every corner of the room. What? What are you making that noise for? Demanded the king, turning furiously to the dwarf. The latter seemed to have recovered in great measure from his intoxication, and looking fixedly but quietly into the tyrant's face, merely ejaculated, I? How could it have been me? The sound appeared to come from without, observed one of the courtiers. I fancy it was the parrot at the window, whetting his bill upon the cage wires. True, replied the monarch, as if much relieved by the suggestion. But on the honor of a knight, I could have sworn it was the gritting of this vagabond's teeth. Hereupon the dwarf laughed. The king was too confirmed a joker to object to anyone's laughing, and displayed a set of large, powerful, and very repulsive teeth. Moreover, he avowed his perfect willingness to swallow as much wine as desired. The monarch was pacified, and having drained another bumper with no very perceptible ill effect, Hopfrog entered at once and with spirit into the plans for the masquerade. I cannot tell. What was the association of idea? Observed he, very tranquilly, and as if he had never tasted wine in his life. But just after your majesty had struck the girl and thrown the wine in her face. Just after your majesty had done this, and while the parrot was making that odd noise outside the window, there came into my mind a capital diversion, one of my own country frolics, often enacted among us as our masquerades, but here it will be new altogether. Unfortunately, however, it requires the company of 8 persons, and here we are, cried the king, laughing at his acute discovery at the coincidence. 8 to a fraction. I and my 7 ministers. Come, what is the diversion? We call it, replied the cripple, the 8 chained orangutans, and it really is excellent sport, if well enacted. We will enact it, remarked the king, drawing himself up and lowering his eyelids. The beauty of the game, continued Hopfrog, lies in the frighted occasions among the women. Capital! Roared in chorus the monarch and his ministry. I will equip you as orangutans, proceeded the dwarf. Leave all that to me. The resemblance shall be so striking that the company of masqueraders will take you for real beasts, and of course they will be as much terrified as astonished. Oh, this is exquisite! Exclaimed the king. Frog, I will make a man of you. The chains are for the purpose of increasing the confusion by their jangling. You are supposed to have escaped, en masse, from your keepers, Your Majesty cannot conceive the effect produced at a masquerade by 8 chained orangutans, imagined to be real ones by most of the company, and rushing in with savage cries among the crowd of delicately and gorgeously habited men and women. The contrast is inimitable. It must be, said the king, and the council arose hurriedly, as it was growing late, to put in execution the scheme of Hop Frog. His mode of equipping the party as orangutans was very simple, but effective enough for his purposes. The animals in question had, at the epoch of my story, very rarely been seen in any part of the civilized world, and as the imitations made by the dwarf were sufficiently beast-like and more than sufficiently hideous, their truthfulness to nature was thus thought to be secured. The king and his ministers were first encased in tight-fitting stockinette shirts and drawers. They were then saturated with tar. At this stage of the process, someone of the party suggested feathers, but the suggestion was at once overruled by the dwarf, who soon convinced the 8, by ocular demonstration, that the hair of such a brute as the orangutan was much more efficiently represented by flax. A thick coating of the latter was accordingly plastered upon the coating of tar. A long chain was now procured. First, it was passed about the waist of the king and tied. Then about another of the party and also tied, then about all successfully in the same manner. When this chaining arrangement was complete, and the party stood as far apart from each other as possible, they formed a circle, and to make all things appear natural, Hop Frog passed the residue of the chain in 2 diameters at right angles across the circle, after the fashion adopted in the present day by those who capture chimpanzees, or rather large apes, in Borneo. The grand saloon in which the masquerade was to take place was a circular room, very lofty, and receiving the light of the sun only through a single window on top. At night, the season for which the apartment was especially designed, it was illuminated principally by a large chandelier, depending by a chain from the center of the skylight. And lowered or elevated by means of a counterbalance as usual. But, in order not to look unsightly, this latter passed outside the cupola and over the roof. The arrangements of the room had been left to Trippetta's superintendence, but in some particulars, it seems, she had been guided by the calmer judgment of her friend the dwarf. At his suggestion, it was that on this occasion the chandelier was removed. Its waxen drippings, which in weather so warm it was quite impossible to prevent, would have been seriously detrimental to the rich dresses of the guests, who, on account of the crowded state of the saloon, could not all be expected to keep from out its center, that is to say, from under the chandelier. Additional sconces were set in various parts of the hall, out of the way, and a flambeau, emitting sweet odor, was placed in the right hand of each of the caryatides that stood against the wall, some 50 or 60 altogether. The 8 orangutans, taking Hop Frog's advice, waited patiently until midnight, when the room was thoroughly filled with masqueraders, before making their appearance. No sooner had the clock ceased striking, however, than they rushed, or rather rode in all together, for the impediments of their chains caused most of the party to fall, and all to stumble as they entered. The exact timing caused the excitement among the masqueraders to be prodigious, and filled the heart of the king with glee. As had been anticipated, there were not a few of the guests who supposed the ferocious looking creatures to be beasts of some kind in reality, if not precisely orangutans. Many of the women swooned with affright, and had not the king taken the precaution to exclude all weapons from the saloon, his party might soon have expiated the frolic in their blood. As it was, a general rush was made for the doors, but the king had ordered them to be locked immediately upon his entrance, and at the dwarf's suggestion the keys had been deposited with him. While the tumult was at its height, and each masquerader attentive only to his own safety, for in fact there was much real danger from the pressure of the excited crowd, the chain by which the chandelier ordinarily hung, and which had been drawn up on its removal, might have been seen very gradually to descend, until its hooked extremity came within 3 feet of the floor. Soon after this, the king and his 7 friends, having reeled about the hall in all directions, found themselves at length in its center, and of course in immediate contact with the chain. While they were thus situated, the dwarf, who had followed noiselessly at their heels, inciting them to keep up the commotion, took hold of their own chain at the intersection of the 2 portions, which crossed the circle diametrically and at right angles. Here, with the rapidity of thought, he inserted the hook from which the chandelier had been wont to depend, and in an instant, by some unseen agency, the chandelier chain was drawn so far upward as to take the hook out of reach, and as an inevitable consequence to drag the orangutans together in close connection, and face to face. The masqueraders by this time had recovered in some measure from their alarm, and beginning to regard the whole matter as a well-contrived pleasantry, set up a loud shout of laughter at the predicament of the apes. "Leave them to me!" now screamed Hop Frog, his shrill voice making itself easily heard through all the den. "Leave them to me! I fancy I know them. If I can only get a good look at them, I can soon tell who they are." Here, scrambling over the heads of the crowd, he managed to get to the wall, when, seizing a flambeau from one of the caryatides, he returned, as he went, to the center of the room, leapt with the agility of a monkey upon the king's head, and thence clambered a few feet up the chain, holding down the torch to examine the group of orangutans, and still screaming, "I shall soon find out who they are." And now, while the whole assembly, the apes included, were convulsed with laughter, the jester suddenly uttered a shrill whistle, when the chain flew violently up for about 30 feet, dragging with it the dismayed and struggling orangutans and leaving them suspended in mid-air between the skylight and the floor. Hop Frog, clinging to the chain as it rose, still maintained his relative position in respect to the 8 maskers, and still, as if nothing were the matter, continued to thrust his torch down toward them as though endeavoring to discover who they were. So thoroughly astonished was the whole company at this ascent that a dead silence of about a minute's duration ensued. It was broken by just such a low, harsh, grating sound as had before attracted the attention of the king and his counselors, which the former threw the wine in the face of Trippetta. But on the present occasion, there could be no question as to whence the sound ensued. It came from the fang-like teeth of the dwarf, who ground them and gnashed them as he foamed at the mouth and glared with an expression of maniacal rage into the upturned countenances of the king and his 7 companions. "Aha!" said at length the infuriated jester. "Aha! I begin to see who these people are now." Here, pretending to scrutinize the king more closely, he held the flambeau to the flaxen coat which enveloped him, and which instantly burst into a sheet of vivid flame. In less than half a minute, the whole 8 orangutans were blazing fiercely, amid the shrieks of the multitude who gazed at them from below, horror-stricken and without the power to render them the slightest assistance. At length the flames, suddenly increasing in virulence, forced the jester to climb higher up the chain, to be out of their reach, and as he made his movement, the crowd again sank for a brief instant into silence. The dwarf seized his opportunity and once more spoke. "I now see distinctly," he said, "what manner of people these maskers are. They are a great king and his 7 privy councillors, a king who does not scruple to strike a defenseless girl, and his 7 councillors who abet him in the outrage. As for myself, I am simply Hopfrog the jester, and this is my last jest." Owing to the high combustibility of both the flax and the tar to which it adhered, the dwarf had scarcely made an end of his brief speech before the work of vengeance was complete. The 8 corpses swung in their chains, a fetid, blackened, hideous, and indistinguishable mass. The cripple hurled his torch at them, clambered leisurely to the ceiling, and disappeared through the skylight. It is supposed that Trippetta, stationed on the roof of the saloon, had been the accomplice of her friend in his fiery revenge, and that together they effected their escape to their own country. For neither was seen again. And that was Hopfrog. I do remember liking that one. I remember that that was the story where I first learned what flax was. And the word scruple. Nothing better than torching a king and his yes-man at one of his own parties, huh? What a beautiful jest. How funny it is. Let's see. And next, we shall do yes. This one is quite the classic, and for good reason. The Telltale Heart. One of the most famous of the Poe works, but I certainly love it, so I'm going to read it. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with which dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon that vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night just at 12 I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening. just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I had dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! When I had made an end to these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wishing them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no! They heard, they suspected, they knew! They were making a mockery of my horror! And this I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart! And that was the Telltale Heart. Would trouble me no more. Don't look at the remaining pages. Oh boy, I sure hope he doesn't do anything weird to the old man's corpse. Berenice flashback. I'm being so normal right now, guys. Bro sucks at Among Us. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna do a couple of, one or two of the poems. And then I'm gonna conclude with my favorite of the stories. So, 773. Okay. So this first poem is Lenore, and I like to think of it as a prequel to The Raven, which I read last week. Was it last week? No, the week before. Which I read last time I read from this book. Lenore. Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll. A saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. And Guy de Vere, hast thou no tear? Weep now, or nevermore. See on yon drear and rigid bier low lies thy love, Lenore. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that ever died so young, a dirge for her the doubly dead in that she died so young. Wretches! Ye loved her for her wealth, and hated her for her pride, and when she fell in feeble health, ye blessed her that she died. How shall the ritual then be read? The requiem how be sung? By you, by yours, the evil eye? By yours, the slanderous tongue, that did to death the innocents that died, and died so young? Peccavimus! But rave not thus, and let a Sabbath song go up to God, so solemnly the dead may feel no wrong. The sweet Lenore had gone before, with hope that flew beside, leaving thee wild for the dear child that should have been thy bride. For her, the fair and debonair, that now so lowly lies, the life upon her yellow hair, but not within her eyes. The life still there upon her hair, the death upon her eyes. Avaunt! Tonight my heart is light. No dirge will I upraise, but waft the angel on her flight with the pain of old days. Let no bell toll, lest her sweet soul amid its hallowed mirth should catch the note, as it doth float up from the damned earth, to friends above, from fiends below. The indignant ghost is riven from hell onto a high estate far up within the heaven, from grief and groan to golden throne, beside the King of Heaven. And that was Lenore, and that was probably 30 minutes before the bird came in and ruined his life. And next, the poem Annabel Lee. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child, in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cold, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. And that was the poem, Annabel Lee. Man, the common cold really did a number on people back in those days, didn't it? You get a cough and it's over. Please don't pull her out of her tomb. I love how we all suspect that like the minute a love interest is mentioned as dead, we're like, oh, he's gonna fuck with the corpse, isn't he? Okay, we're gonna conclude this session of Poe reading with my favorite book, or favorite story, which I had meant to read during my Halloween endurance, but ran out of time to do so. Don't worry, this isn't the last time I'll be reading Poe's works. There are so many more to do. There are so many, like, of the well known and lesser well known stuff. I've barely read maybe a tenth of the stuff in here. Less than that. Maybe a 13th. Maybe a 15th. In any case, I've barely read anything from here, so I'll be back and read more of this. Probably, like, you know, here and there. Even if it's not like the weekly reading, I'll still come back to this now and again. This will come back. For example, I need to read the Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Fall of the House of Usher, but each of those is like 30 pages in this. Uh, 15 to 30 pages. And the text on this book is so small that 30 pages is like a lot. So, I'll be doing more of these another time. But for now, we're just gonna end it with one more as I flip to it. Okay, so this one was meant for my Halloween endurance stream, and it is my favorite of his works just because I love the visuals and I love the adaptations I've seen of it. Um, it's brilliant. And also, it's so cathartic to see the hubristic outcome. This is The Mask of the Red Death. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade, but first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites had a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bazaar. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, and the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to or fro depended, uh, scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had finally ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to the other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same discomfort and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent event and revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these the dreams writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet. And then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more warmly than ever. More merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays of the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life. And the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock. And thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sinked into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bonds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was soon seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room, where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand. Now, let's see. With deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage, and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died, each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. And that was The Mask of the Red Death. One of my favorites because oftentimes when I was reading it myself, I would pause to absorb the details, which is why I sort of paused a few times here too. There's so much imagery going on in this one that it bears pausing through to fully conjure the ideas that he's putting forth. And one thing that I think a lot of adaptations of this story get wrong is that they make too few use of pauses. There's one big pause usually when the masquerader in the guise of the Red Death appears. But there isn't enough. Rarely is there enough consideration for the pause that happens in the celebrations when the clock strikes the next hour. And when you think about it, the pause grows longer from 1 o'clock, one chime, just one, to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock. How long it takes for a clock to stop tolling its bell at 12 o'clock. And that's something that's not often appreciated enough. So I thought I would do my own spin on that and pause more often during this read to help appreciate those details. Because the frenzy, the revelry, the partying, all of that is a farce. All of it is a facade to disguise the fear of the plague that is being written about here. And one thing that a lot of the adaptations get wrong is that they usually have the Red Death's mask be that of a skull. Obviously for Memento Mori and Grim Reaper parallels, but the way the story describes it is more that the mask is contorted is sort of evoking the contorted expression of somebody who dies from the Red Death, the distorted, twisted expression of agony and fear. And I don't see many, if any, adaptations do that for the mask. They instead opt for the, plain skull, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I want to see how grotesque a true mask of the Red Death can be. And the fact that when they pull apart the costume, there's nothing there. There's no body. There's no body there. And just the way that its presence seems less a physical apparition than sort of a you weren't safe. I made it here after all, and you are all already dead. Yeah, exactly. If the mask was a mimic of some sort, I think that would be much better than, just the skull, but I digress. I suppose it's something I'll either have to wait for somebody who has the similar feeling or make it myself someday. In either case, that was that was the Mask of the Red Death, and that was today's final Edgar Allan Poe story. This selection of stories and poems is the one I was going to do during the endurance stream, but didn't have the time to do. So I'm glad I got to come back around and do it here. Um, I will I will be looking for a new chapter book to start possibly next week, if at all possible. Um, I am accepting suggestions and ideas if you have anything. Um, just because I want to read more things that maybe I don't already know, things that are perhaps outside of my wheelhouse. Um, because as much of a joy as it is to introduce my audience to literature they might not have heard of or properly read before or haven't read in a long time, so too is it a joy for me to be introduced to things via my audience. So, if any of you have a suggestion, I will make a post on Twitter as well and Blue Sky so that anybody who has chapter book ideas I can get started on considering making a list out of, and perhaps even putting on the list for next time. But for now, thank you all so much for being here, my wonderful Rainiacs and Langsters. It is an absolute joy to get to read for you all again, and I look forward to doing even more. And of course, I will be returning to the Poe collection from time to time. Um, it's gonna be a nice standby book to have. So if I ever just need to do a reading stream and I don't have any ideas, or if there's like a one-off I want to do, I can just do that. So it's gonna be cool. But I'm always thankful for everyone who's here, who comes by to hang out, to listen, and I hope that my voice acting, my narration, my sort of script direction in terms of the pauses in Red Death were enjoyable, or at least unique takes that you guys could enjoy listening to today. I will be back this Saturday. This week, there will be no fighting game because I want to enjoy the new Necro Dancer DLC that has come out. Both for Rift of and Crypt of the Necro Dancer. So Saturday and Sunday, I will be playing each game a piece. Starting with Rift of the Necrodancer on Saturday, where I will be playing the Shovel Knight DLC music tracks. And then on Sunday, I will be playing Crypt of the Necrodancer with the playable Shovel Knight DLC. For those who aren't aware, Rift of the Necrodancer is an amazing rhythm game, one of my recent favorites, and one that I consistently find myself coming back to buy DLC for. Darn you, Brace Yourself Games, for making so many banger DLC packs, because I keep having to buy them. Love you guys so much. And Crypt of the Necrodancer is the preceding game of Rift of the Necrodancer, in which it is more of an action roguelite with 8-bit inspired graphics and rhythmic gameplay. I haven't actually streamed that for you guys properly yet, so I'm very excited to do so this week and to show you guys a really fun, awesome game that's one of my favorites. So, um, yeah, it's gonna be great. And then, uh, basically, for those wondering, obviously we've had spooky season as the theme for the past 2 months. And is there a theme for this month? Yes, actually, and it's not Christmas. Christmas is saved for December 1st, maybe after Thanksgiving in the US has passed, but not before that. I am holding the line as long as I can. I am not giving in. I am not defrosting any Potteroos yet. So, in the meantime, the fall theme is falling back as a reference to daylight savings time where we go backwards an hour. Um, and so, in doing so, we are falling backwards through the years of gaming history. And we will be exploring retro or at least retro aesthetic slash inspired themes. So be on the lookout for the um, upcoming streams for this month because I think you guys are gonna enjoy the nostalgia bursts that I have in store for you, especially if some of you among my audience are able to tune in live. I think you'll be able to see and experience in real time a lot of reminiscing with me. So, we're gonna go retro before we go Christmas. We are gonna go Christmas. I can't hold that off forever. But um, let's enjoy a little bit of, I guess, nostalgia baiting, for lack of a more charitable term. But um, reminiscing. Oh my god. Oh, that's brilliant, Elu. Oh, okay. We're doing that. The theme for this month is reminiscing. And yeah, so get ready because I'm going to take you back to the past to play the games that kicked ass. If you know, you know. Anyway. um so yeah, I'm very excited. This is going to be a great month, great theme. Retro games. Oh my god, you guys are on fire with these puns. I love it. Samurai Jack. Okay, you know what? That's not a bad guess. Gotta get back to the past. Samurai Jack. I don't know. Anyway. All right. All right. I better I'm yapping. I'm just I'm just yapping now. But yeah. I'm just really excited for what's in store. So, I will see you guys this weekend, and we're gonna move and groove. We're gonna, um, have some fun with some rhythm games and just work our way through the Necro Dancer games. And with the added bonus of the Shovel Knight DLC, so I'm really looking forward to that. And hopefully eventually I can get my hands on Shovel Knight for Steam because I have it on my PlayStation 4, which I can't stream from. Damn it. Pastor A was a fool for being a console gamer. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, that's all for me for today. That's all from me for today, and thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for everyone who hung out. Thanks for everyone who just tuned in to listen. Thank you, all my wonderful Rainiacs and Langsters. Thank you to VOD Gang if you're watching this after the fact. And yeah, I hope this was some nice background noise, some nice sleep aid or chore, you know, noise and stuff like that. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. So until then, make sure to eat well, stay hydrated, and get lots and lots of good rest. And I mean that. Sleep is very important, and I want all of you out there to be well rested. You can eat and drink and be merry all you want, but you need to make sure you rest adequately. And of course, as always, the most important reminder: unshrimp yourselves. Take care, everyone. Have a radiant rest of your day, and I will see you on Saturday. Bye bye.